How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Talk4 Podcast. So excited to have you here today and show you this fantastic episode. Just want to say quickly that episodes like this one and all the ones before and the ones in future are made possible by people who subscribe. Hopefully, just like you. I'm going to ask you today if you can leave a subscribe, leave a follow, leave a rating, leave a like or a comment, and just support the show in the little ways that you can like that. It makes a huge difference on my end. And quickly, just want to plug as well. I've taken 30 of the best episodes of this podcast and turned them into a fantastic book that goes into 150 secrets to greatness. Each one of those 30 episodes gets crunched down into 5 of the best key takeaways from the whole talk and turns them into a fantastic book. Highly recommend you check it out. Please support the show by grabbing a copy, either a paperback or an ebook. And I can't wait to show you guys this one today. So guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode. How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 161 of Talk4, the quickfire podcast where we ask 4 great questions to unique and interesting people. Behind the mic today is your host, Skupien. That's me. Let me introduce our incredible guest for today. Brig Barker is going to be answering our questions today. So, Brig, wow, man, I'm super excited about this. It's been a little bit of time coming, and this is going to be a great chat. I'm honored to have another great guest in this show today, and that's certainly going to be you. So, first question, how are you today and what's been going on, man?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Louis. It's great to be here. You've got a great thing going. Yeah, it's been a good day. I've had kind of a jump start to my day with a couple of things, so I'm excited to be here and we can talk about anything. So let's go for it.
Absolutely, it's going to be great. So first place to start, let's get a kind of picture of just everything that you're up to, who you are, and where you've been, really. So we always do that sort of minute to 2 minute elevator pitch to kick it off. So if you can just lead us into that, then just a little bit about your day job, an intro, kind of snapshot, and just the life of you. So just everything you've got going on, that'd be a great start. And then we're going to really dig into it on the big scale. I'm looking at these questions and I'm just feeling all kinds of podcast hosts excited about them. So yeah, let's start then we'll get into it.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'll just tell you up front, kind of bottom line up front, as we say, I'm all in on AI, Louis, at this point. I'm working at the intersection of leveraging AI and intelligence and counterterrorism and all of that. We can talk about that more, but we've got a great team at Kronus Intelligence Group. So we're doing some very cool things with that. But kind of how I got here was a kind of a long and bumpy road. But I started way back, kind of growing up. I grew up in Japan and then out in the desert of Southern California, and then headed to college and then on to the Army. And I had a very rough assignment stationed in Italy for 3 years. The 82nd Airborne had a unit there, and so actually I had a lot of fun. Did a lot of trips, deployments. I did a Northern Iraq deployment. Did some work in the UK, did some work all over Europe, and then from there did a career in the FBI. Started out with your basic, violent crime, fugitives, bank robberies, kidnappings, and then I bumped into terrorism and Al-Qaeda in particular on a deployment to Kenya, and that really launched me into what I loved to do and still love to do is, kind of fighting evil in that realm, and so. That took me, I spent about, I'd say 30 years total, Louis, traveling overseas, doing things. And so then I retired out of San Diego. And then since then, I think I've kind of done everything that I've raised my hand for and like I said, stumbled into. So that's kind of the, quick and dirty of it.
I like it. So let's go into the slightly longer form of that then too. So, I mean, just like I said, looking at everything you've got going on, it's a fascinating background. Combat veteran with the 82nd Airborne to serving as a supervisory special agent in the FBI. So I'd love to dig into something I really enjoy digging into with my former guests too, just what some of those big moments were along that journey. So time, obviously getting into the FBI. So how did the military experience sort of affect that, and what shaped your approach to kind of the intelligence and counterterrorism work, and just any mentorship along the way you received and experiences or stories that really kind of paved the way for everything you did and are now doing?
Yeah, so growing up, I didn't have much mentorship, and so when I was in college, and I've told this story before, but essentially I ran out of money in college, like many people, and I went to the Army ROTC booth, between semesters, and I went up to this young Army captain. He was a Ranger type guy, and I basically said, "Hey, I'm going to join your program," and it's basically because I needed money. He looked at my report card and he said, "Not good enough," and so it was the first time I was challenged as a young man. But there was something motivating about that. And so I went back the next semester, worked as hard as I could on my grades, and I kind of crawled back to this guy and said, "Here's my report card." And he says, "Okay, you're good enough." And they brought me into the program. And so that started about a 3-year stint of this Army captain walking along with me, teaching me, training me, chewing into me when I failed, but also motivating me. And so that was really big for me. That was a big 3 years. I learned a lot, and that kind of launched me, into the military. And then I got out there, and I was, part of a unit that was incredible. The leaders, which I wasn't expecting, were incredible, and I was just taking it in, saying, "I want to be like this guy. I want to be like this guy." And so I think that kind of shaped me, Louis, as far as direction and where I would end up, hopefully, as a leader at some point. And so I did my 5 years in the military, completed my captain's advanced course, and then I did a career in the FBI after that. And I'm glad to go into that part of it as far as what happened from there.
Yeah, let's do exactly that then. So the FBI, you played a key role in counterterrorism efforts against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So the big ones, basically, then. So how did the kind of collaboration between military and intelligence agencies evolve in the fight against global terrorism? What were some of the challenges you faced working US embassies across the world? Just a little bit about the career there in the FBI and things that went on.
Yeah, so this really kind of came down to one trip was really kind of the impetus for launching me into the terrorism side. I was loving working violent crime. I was a new guy, I was having, indicting cases and going to trial and all those things in Los Angeles. I think in Los Angeles, we had 1,500 bank robberies in one year. It was just crazy. We had sometimes they go to 3 robberies in one day, But in 1998, I was part of an FBI tactical team, and we went to Nairobi, Kenya, where Al-Qaeda, based on, essentially Osama bin Laden saying, "Let's attack U.S. interests," he set forth a fatwa in February of 1998 to attack U.S. interests. And then Al-Qaeda carried out the attack in Kenya and in Tanzania, essentially on the same day. So we went over to Nairobi, Kenya, and I was there for about a month on this. And I was just fascinated by this, Louis. I was like, this is all I want to do. I don't want to go back and work bank robberies. I had been working some organized crime and gangs and things like that, but I was just like, this is what I want to do. I had this strange interest in Arabic, which took off as well. I started going to a bunch of Arabic schools, but that was kind of the beginning of, counterterrorism as the FBI knew it. We were making it up in a hotel room. Like, how do we do this? How do we investigate overseas? And so it was just super fun for me. So that kicked me down the road of just continuously heading overseas, mostly to Africa, on and off for about 18 years, Middle East as well, going to Arabic schools, and then eventually ending up in deep collaboration with the military you mentioned. So I was picked to be the senior liaison officer for the FBI with DoD Special Operations Command. So I was there for 2 years, and then I also did another 2 years embedded working with special operations, and I loved it. But we're trying to figure this out. Like, what does the FBI bring to the fight? But we kind of figured it out. So I think now it's probably pretty streamlined. But I felt somewhat like a plank holder as this thing was all taking off.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, thinking back on previous guests and stuff too, I can't remember, I'm stretching my brain in it, but I can't remember anyone who's actually had a career in the FBI coming on the show so far. So you might be the first, but then again, I don't want to guarantee that because there may be someone who had a segment somewhere who's going to be like, hey, that's not cool.
Sure.
But anyway, I'm curious. So the FBI, what is that life like then, I guess, doing that job? So I sounds from what you're describing there, like it's a lot of time on the road, but is there kind of a community in amongst all of that too? Or is it constant kind of in, out, and then a bit of a solo, almost quite lonely path in that career field? How would you describe it?
Yeah, great question. And the way I got into the FBI, Louis, is my mom cut an article out of a newspaper that said the FBI was looking for special agents. I had not even thought about this. And so I read it and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. So I applied, went through the process, got in. Life in the FBI, I loved it. Like it was such a, they really put a lot of time and effort into trying to hire pretty decent people, and so there's a lot of commonality. There's very much like-minded people. Over 20 years in the FBI, I never saw or experienced political conversations. No one was political, or they might have been, but we never heard about it. But we sit if you can kind of picture in a squad area, and there's about 12 people working together, everybody from different backgrounds. And we're all working in the same direction, the same trajectory of, hey, we're working on, this gang who's been, selling drugs and killing people and robbing people. And so we're all, kind of coalition of the willing focused on whatever the problem set is. So whether it's terrorism or white collar crime or whatever it may be. But I loved it. We worked, it's an interesting environment compared to other environments I've been in. And then and I also speak to it from being a supervisor for 7 years. You give an agent, probably 10 to 12 cases, and you just let them work their cases. So there's not a lot of micromanagement. There's definitely file reviews that we do constantly as a supervisor. There's, prosecutors that are always monitoring the cases, but you really try to hire people that have self-initiative, are hardworking, that aren't not going to be sloughing off. Now, that's not everybody. There's still, problems here and there. But for the most part, you work your cases. So I would go out each day and I would drive by a house and write down a license plate, or I would go with another agent. We would interview someone at their apartment. Um, but in the end, you're either trying to prosecute somebody who's come up and that there's elements of a serious federal crime there, or you're just gathering intelligence. So, but overall, the environment was great, whether you're based domestically or overseas.
Really interesting. I mean, it sounds like a very, very fascinating, but also super challenging job. I mean, what were some of those really key skills to do in that job then as well? So you mentioned it applied to you and you saw it in, pretty, I mean, it sounds pretty normal newspaper article, advert and stuff too, but my God, the selection process and, getting to, a quality career path throughout all of that too must have been difficult. Can you talk to me a bit about that too? Just what some of that selection was like and the things you had to learn or maybe even unlearn to be good at the job?
Sure. Yeah. So the selection process going way back, I applied twice. So the first time I applied, I went through the process and it included, panel interviews and, medical exams and polygraphs and things like that. And then I hit a hiring freeze. And so the FBI stopped, bringing people to Quantico to start for about 2 years. And so I was kind of in this no man's land for 2 years. And then after about 2 years, I got a letter that said, hey, the freeze is open. If you want to reapply, you have to go back through the process, right? So, because the process had changed, new tests and things like that. And so I went back through, and it took me probably another year and a half. And it's a little bit rigorous. A lot of it is about integrity. They're trying to make sure everyone's got skeletons in their closet, right? We all do, but it's about being honest about those up front. So, hey, yes, I did this, kind of upfront, here are the things that I've done in the past I'm not proud of. And then you end up taking a polygraph test, and that brings to light a lot of the truth. And so a lot of the process is the polygraph piece and then background investigation. So they go out and knock on all your neighbors' doors and say, hey, what's this Brig guy like? Was he good? Was he bad? Those kind of things. So, but overall, I think the process took me about 2.5 years by the time I finally got in, Louis. And then you end up on a Sunday night at Quantico, Virginia, in a class of about 50 students. And so then you begin the FBI Academy, which is, at the time was, I think, 4 months or 5 months. And so there you're going through, legal training, firearms, how to interview people, tactical skills, all those things. So, and we can certainly go into detail on any of that as you want to, but that was kind of my journey. Everybody's journey is different. Some people, it took them 10 years to get in. Some people got in 6 months.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sounds like anything, FBI or special forces, whatever you go into, is always a tough selection process. So I'd love to learn more about the things you had to do there. But I think one thing I'd really like to do then, so I think it's nice to see that you've had that time out there, in the past, and now you're still in the industry. So you've seen this kind of like a long change, really, or I guess maybe something's not changed within this industry. I'd love to just see what's changed then. So if we kind of start with maybe just a bit of a briefing on where the world is right now with all this. I mean, is it bad or is it bad? And you mentioned AI a lot too, and I really want to dig into that on the big scale too, because we've been through AI on this show quite a bit in different aspects. So we've looked at, how it's being integrated in the Air Force, how it's been integrated in just general everything, cyber. I would love to just get a picture of how this is being applied right now. Not only on our side of the fence, but also on the other side of the fence. Like, is it a level playing field? Are they using it against us? How is that looking? Just a bit of a briefing on where things are at, and then we're going to go into it a little bit deeper.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll talk AI specifically, and of course there are many people that are great experts compared to me, but I'm in enough that I try to learn something every day. That's kind of my focus right now with AI, and so these are some of the things that I'm seeing, and I'm looking at AI kind of through the, again, counterterrorism intelligence lens, right? So my focus is not using AI to build a presentation or to write a paper, but it's collating and making more efficient the use of intelligence and things like that. I think we've been in this, kind of ride of technology optimism, as they call it. So, hey, look, AI is cool. I can do all this great, all these great things with it. It can check my papers. It can write papers for me. It can write a LinkedIn post for me. Oh, it's very neat, and it's making more efficient in my day. But I think if you read what the true experts are saying, and I read, papers where there's 100 AI experts they're swarming this. It seems as though we're going to start seeing some of the dark side of this, and I know we're already seeing some of that. But the prediction is towards the end of 2025 that we're really going to see the use of agentic AI, which for viewers, I'm sure most know, but it's basically creating an agent to do things for you with AI. So if I create an agent and I say I want you on your own to essentially breach the backdoor of Google and steal data, well, that agent is going to go and do that, and I don't have to do anything, and it's going to work around the clock, trying to find some kind of access point and steal data, right? Or I create an agent that is supposed to essentially figure out or kind of decrypt the password protection infrastructure for Amazon, something like that. And so we're going to start seeing a lot more of this. The threat actors are out there. There's certain countries that are known threat actors. But I think that the problem with AI is we're going to see a lot more deep fakes. And, I think people are familiar with deep fakes. I can have a video with Louis and it looks like him. It sounds like him, but it's not him. We're seeing this in a lot of different realms. But we're also going to start seeing it provide, issues with security. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So, let's talk about a major soccer stadium, right? There's security, pieces in place. Security vendors have, let's say there's 10 different vendors that are trying to protect the stadium, gunshot detection, and facial recognition, and access control. AI will be able to go in, and if I have a gunshot detector that tries to look for people carrying a weapon inside of a jacket, I can go with AI and say, whenever there's a hit, a positive hit, say there's nothing there, right? Or facial recognition. I'm looking for a certain, terrorist or criminal, and facial recognition would identify this person walking into the stadium. AI can negate that and say, there's nothing to see here. And that guy gets into the stadium. So I can use AI as a threat actor to do those kind of things too. So there's a lot I think we're going to see in front of us, unfortunately. But I think we knew it was coming eventually.
Yeah. So if we kind of dig into those methods of terrorism, they've evolved over the years, haven't they? But also there's things that are quite similar as well. So I mean, when I think terrorism, I think of big explosions and fear. Essentially, it's inspiring fear to create an outcome. And I think you gave some great examples there, but generally it seems like the stuff that they used to do, is it going to kind of change? So I mean, how do you inspire fear via the internet? Really, is it all just going to be scams and stuff? Is it all just going to be kind of like malware and hacking and bits like that? But it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't seem to have the same sort of fear factor that something like a bomb or a proper attack would. How is that going to look over the next few years? And how do you think that's all going to change? And why do you think things may stay the same and they're going to keep to the old methods? Or do you think they're all going to transition to attacking us in different and smarter ways now?
Yeah, great question. So if, I always try to put myself on, and let's talk about terrorism in particular. If I put myself in the terrorism cell realm, I'm the terror cell. I have four other people that I work with, right? Way back when, back in the, kind of Al-Qaeda hierarchical days, that carried out the 9/11 attack and carried out other attacks globally. It was very cavemanish in a way. It was, we use couriers, we use, Hawala networks to move money around. It was very basic, right? Now, especially at some point we can talk about ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the differences and things like that. But in particular with Al-Qaeda, that is an organization that they plan methodically. They procure over time. They're not in a rush. They're patient, right? So if I'm Al-Qaeda, I can leverage AI to do a lot of things in my 2-year spin up towards an attack, right? So if let's say hypothetically the attack is towards Heathrow, and we say, okay, we're going to take 2 years and we're going to do this right. I'm going to use AI to do a lot of the things as far as reconnaissance and surveillance through subways and into the airport, and again accessing the airport and computer systems, things like that. So I think what we'll see is folks that are again more relaxed, patient. They're going to use AI to try to get deeper in as far as surveillance, reconnaissance, procurement, movement across, globally, transporting to different places where the attack's supposed to take place, things like that. So AI can be used to leverage a lot of that, and a lot more techniques and tactics are going to become available through AI. So that's kind of where I see this going. ISIS is, for me, it's kind of a sloppy gang as opposed to a very organized, methodical organization. They carry out horrific attacks. They're barbaric. They have essentially the same ideology as Al-Qaeda, but they're more quick hit. I don't see them using AI as much, but I think for groups like Al-Qaeda or like Quds Force in Iran or, Hezbollah, I can see them leveraging this to their own benefit.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm no conspiracy theorist and stuff, but I want to throw a couple of things at you too and kind of give you a bit of a chance to answer on this however you feel best. But you hear stuff in the news and every now and then you can pick a hole in it too. There's been a couple of things I saw recently. So you mentioned Heathrow, explosion and shut down for a day, no backup generators. Bit weird, right? And off the coast of the UK, I think it was somewhere near Hull, some oil tanker got bumped into by another one, and it's like these things are happening and there's never really any kind of explanation to it too. So I guess my question really is, I don't know if those were that, or if those were genuine human error and just mistakes that were made and stuff too. But it seems like generally just the infrastructure and stuff isn't prepared for a crisis. Would you say we're ready to deal with something like this generally? So if, the day came, you say maybe they're waiting, maybe it's going to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Do you think that, countries like the UK or, Europe or the US, are we ready to deal with something like that? Or are we really on the back foot with just being prepared to deal with crisis in these places?
Yeah, another great question, Louis. I think what happens is we get better incrementally after bad things happen. That's been my experience. So 9/11 happened, right? 3,000 people were killed. We did a lot of things after that to improve our security. I think that goes globally. Now, the other thing I'll say is country by country. Some countries are better than others, right? Some countries have no essential protection, no security, no interest in protecting their country and their people against terrorism. Countries like the U.S. and the U.K. They have really, in general, effective, competent authority figures. And I've told you I've worked in London for a bit. Compared to other countries I've been in Africa, where they have no technology to do anything, and so I think it goes by country as far as if we could graph, kind of a continuum. But I think also in law enforcement, after a precedent, then we work on getting better at that precedent. Oh, we don't have backup generators. We need to get 10 backup generators or whatever it might be, whatever the requirement is. So we kind of learned, way back when I started working in organized crime, we had no idea how this whole piece worked, and they were stealing computer chips and shipping them to Asia, and so we were like, it's a whole new problem set. But then next thing I knew, we were learning. We had training modules. We were going to conferences. We were learning. I had a large task force I ran at one point for a couple of years, and I had an espionage piece of that, which I knew nothing about. And so with that, I started going to conferences, training, learning, talking to people. And so I think we have this innate desire to get better. But a lot of times, the way I've always seen it is terrorists in particular, most of them have no jobs. They sit around with nothing to do all day except plan an attack. And so oftentimes they're better than us because they figure out nooks and crannies that we have left unprotected, and they exploit those. And then we turn and we go, I can't believe they figured that out. Now we've got to do something about that. So that, that's probably pessimism and optimism all in the same paragraph, I guess. But that's kind of what I've seen over the years.
So that's a nice lead in then. So something that I wanted to talk about that I've got on this question list here is just the psychology and the mindset of a terrorist then. So this is going to be interesting. So I know what you mentioned there. Obviously, like you said, they sit around and they think and they plan demises, and sometimes it's over many years. It's not. When I think about that kind of mindset, or at least try to put myself in those shoes, I think straight away hate. But hate and anger are quite synonymous, and I feel like anger would be quite quick. It's difficult to be patient for many years when you're full of anger. It's just a deep rooted hate and stuff. And I guess knowing that kind of gives you a distinct advantage because you can sort of predict what they're doing, but they're very smart as well. So if you just look at that, the psychology of the mindset of a terrorist, then so can you explain some of those factors that you feel like drive them and what they do, and then also what some of the frameworks that the good guys are doing as well to sort of counter that as well, knowing those key data points?
Yeah, and I'm going to caveat this by saying I've taught this for 2 weeks straight for 8 hours a day. I'm going to condense that, Louis. A lot of this, I would say, has to do with leadership of the terrorist cell or the group, right? So if the leadership affects everything. So when I was in the military, good or bad leadership essentially creates and shapes an environment, right? It's the same thing in a terrorist cell. So if you have leaders that are patient and methodical, and they want to take a year to plan, right? Most terrorist attacks are generally planned for about a year. Most of the public doesn't know that. It takes about a year to plan an actual terrorist attack, big or small, right? But if it's an Al-Qaeda type and they say we're going to take a year and plan this, it's all based and dependent on the leadership of the cell, right? So if I join that cell, I kind of come in under that umbrella and I say, oh, okay, this is what we're doing. Or the leadership may say, listen, guys, we're going to get it on within the next week. We're going to go do something bad, right? Okay, well, this is a quick hit, and so it all really kind of depends on this. But as far as the mindset, we're stepping into radicalization. I know, my experience is always in the jihadist side of terrorism, not in, domestic terrorism. I don't know much about that, but as far as the jihadist piece, I sat in a room with these guys for about 18 years, right? So at one point after I retired, people asked me, how many jihadists have you interviewed? And I started counting, right? I think it's 500 to 600 jihadists I've sat in a room with. And so when I speak at conferences, I just tell them, I say, the attendees, I say, I'm going to turn to you from the interrogation room and tell you what they told me or what they said to me, right? And so that's a lot of where I learned, was just sitting with this guy who saw me as a non-believer and that I should die, right? And so, but I had a conversation with him for 3 hours, right? So that's where I learned about the mindset, but it really kind of comes down to this road of radicalization, how they get on the road, what the road of radicalization is like, and then what is the trigger to action or inaction, so I'm glad to go into, depth in that on that piece as you want to. And then I think also you mentioned the good guys, right? So again, based on leadership, who's running the unit, how aggressive they want to be, how slow and methodical, or how dynamic and proactive we want to be. So again, I think everything runs back to that word leadership.
Yeah, definitely. When you talk about these people and that mindset and stuff too, I desperately want to believe that these people are just sorely misguided and very, very lost, actually. But inside there's a human. So I'd like to ask, you've had a lot of conversations with these people, like you said, 500-600 or something along those lines, maybe more, maybe less, don't know the exact number, but were there ever conversations in there where you felt like it wasn't just pure hate and there was actually a human in there too? I mean, I'm curious if there was ever moments of emotion or things that ever came out that made you realize that these people were just a bit misguided and lost, and maybe there was a path to healing for them, or are they the kind of people who are just so ingrained within that hate that it's just almost inescapable for them? I'm just really curious what you think.
Yeah, I think it's a great curiosity. So I would say that every person I talked to in those rooms was a human, right? And from there, some had a really bad childhood. Something bad happened. There was dysfunction from the outset. Some had their cousin killed in Palestine, and they all of a sudden were angry, right? Some just needed to belong to a group. They didn't have a great upbringing, maybe as a teenager, and no mentorship, kind of like me, and they needed someone to take them in. And this jihadist group said, "Hey, come over here. We'll take you in, and we'll teach you things about life." So there's all different kinds of entries into this whole radicalization realm, but they're all humans. I always, and people would say to me, "Hey, you're like a social worker. You just sit down and talk to these people, right?" My motivation, Louis, I can tell you, is my goal was to thwart evil. And so the end game for that for me was recruiting somebody back into their cell. That was my real motivation for going to 6, immersion Arabic schools, traveling overseas a lot, and learning how to, figuring out my place as far as interrogating these guys and recruiting them. But my whole goal was if I can bring this guy into my side and then send him back in, and then he's reporting to me, this is where these guys are in Yemen, or these guys just bought dynamite, or C4, right? Or these guys are planning to attack Heathrow, hypothetically. We're talking about these different scenarios. Then for me, that was a victory. So that was my end game motivation. It wasn't because I wanted to coddle them, but I stumbled into this, Lee. Like, I was interviewing these folks and failed for 2 years. I couldn't get them to talk to me, and then I started experimenting, and I started finding some things that work for me. We talked about jujitsu a little bit, before we started, and it's like you learn a choke, and then you try it, and it's not working, and then you try, and eventually you hit one and you go, okay, I'm going to add this to my repertoire, So I started finding things that were helping and working for me towards this end goal of recruiting them back into their cell. So kind of a long-winded answer to, that was my goal, but every one of them is human, and I all saw them as that.
Would you say that a massive majority of those 500-600 people were killers, or had at least a massive part to play within killing someone, or organizing these things, or were some of them just more logistical?
Yeah, so each cell is made up of different functions, right? It's just like a company. You need the leader, that's running everything, even if it's more of an administrator. And then you have an ideologue, right? You have someone that's and you've had some in the UK that I've followed for years, that people listen to every word, they hang on every word that they say, and some of them are in prison, I think, which is a good thing at this point. And then you have the IT guy. This guy knows tech, he knows AI, he knows all that. And then you have a financier. This guy's like, well, here, and I worked, financial crimes for 3 years after I retired. Like I know how to move money in a certain way that won't be detected by authorities. So you have all these functions within the terror cell. So as far as those guys that sat in the room with, I talked to all of them, right? And I would say a small percentage of them were killers, and some of them were very set on that, right? And there were some that I could not turn them. I would try to turn them from that. And then there were plenty of people that just wanted to be, part of a group, or wanted to use they believed in the cause, but they wanted to use their skill in, IT to help with the cause. Or I just want to be the driver. I want to drive you guys to the attack site, but I want to be part of it. And I want you to pat me on the head and say, hey, thanks for doing that, and then there were other people, and this is all very asymmetric as I'm explaining it, but there were also folks that were recruited in, that were a pawn on a chessboard. And the leaders would say, listen, we feel that Allah sees you as a special person. And the guy says, wow, like I've never been, a part of a group. I've never been called special in my life. And then one day they wake up and they go to him and they say, listen, tomorrow's your day. All of, we were getting from all of that, you should go and blow yourself up. And he says, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me after the recruiting process and the brainwashing and all of that stuff. So we, it's all gamuts, but in the end, like people say, how did you recruit these folks if they're so set on doing something evil? And I said, all I did was make sure that they were seen and they were heard by me, because they had oftentimes never had that their whole life. So I just made sure that, I'm listening to them. And I say, hey, listen, I'd love to meet you next week too. Let's have coffee at Starbucks on Main Street. I just love to hear how things are going with you. I've never met someone from that part of Jordan before, and I just want to learn from you and just sit with you. So I always made sure they were seen and heard. That was my entire interrogation approach. Eventually, it was kind of broken down to that. And so I started finding that was working. But I talked to the whole gamut of folks.
Do you ever meet any one of them or have a conversation with any one of them who ended up regretting what they'd done, or they were maybe ashamed of what they'd done or who they were and wanted to do better? Or all of them, or at least the massive majority of them, were they all just completely steadfast, do you think?
Yeah, so there's a line, right? And I got to the point where after interviewing them for, let's say, an hour, I felt like I could take a grass read and put it on the line and say, this is where this guy is. He's still very conflicted about this whole thing, or he is sold out and I am not bringing him back. So I talked to everyone on that line. I talked to new recruits that just started becoming radicalized, and I would give them options for an off ramp. Hey, listen, don't you think you're putting yourself in a very dangerous situation? Don't you think your mom would not want you to be part of this group? Don't you think, I'm trying to give them an off ramp, and some of them say they would think about it and then they would decide to walk away from it, right? But then there were folks, and oftentimes young people, that were so radicalized that I would walk away and I would just say they had that 100-mile stare. It's like you're a personal trainer, right? You get people working out, and sometimes people are so exhausted that all they do is just their mouth is open and they're just staring, and they just are just kind of gone.
Yep.
And so I talked to folks that were right. And so I talked to people and they were just gone, and there's really nothing I could do at that point except monitor what they're doing, and hopefully catch them from doing something really horrific.
Will add also that's probably me at the end of most days, by the way.
Right. No kidding.
It's a long job. So I mean, so much really, really interesting info there. And I think one of the things I want to dig into now, going off the back of that, is just how things have changed in like our approach too. So it's interesting hearing what you said there. The approach has changed. And if we think about some of the words here, let's say interrogation methods and interrogation strategy and human intelligence, it's interesting how we've gone from like the old days, hundreds of years ago or whatever, to where it was like these insane devices of torture, like beyond belief kind of things. And now we look at some of the stuff that you're talking about too. And it's interesting how we've understood more about human intelligence, the brain, what appeals, emotion, and just done kind of our homework really on what makes people tick. And now some of these things are more on the human scale. How can we appeal to these people? How can we kind of come across in a different way that sort of coaxes an outcome out of them? So I was wondering if you could kind of lay into that a little bit. So how have some of these interrogations methods evolved over time? What role do they play in gathering critical intelligence on transnational threats? And could you just kind of share some of the key lessons from your career on how effective interrogation can lead to breakthrough insights too?
Yeah, so I do believe that, and I don't know what the latest technique is in interrogation, right? But what I believe is we're somewhat stuck in time. And so I'll say we've got some good friends, and my wife's best friend, her dad was an interrogator in the 1950s, and he gave me a book, and it's from the 1950s, right? I read that and I say, this is what worked for me, right? And so y'all in interrogation, I used to teach it. I've taught it for years, and you teach different things. And what I always used to say is, here's my technique. I kind of developed a technique. I kind of branded it. I said, here's my technique. I'm going to go into detail on it. If it works for you, great. If not, find what works for you. So like for years the main technique on the criminal side, if I'm working bank robberies and gangs and things like, is called RPMs, rationalization, projection, minimization, right? It's the, hey, listen, based on what happened to you as a child, I understand why you did what you did. That's rationalizing. Projection. Look, it's not your fault that you robbed the bank. It's really your girlfriend's fault. You project the blame on someone else. And then minimization is you robbed the bank, but listen, no one died, right? So it's a very common technique. It's still taught through different schools of interrogation. So I'm an introvert, right? I go to the FBI Academy and I'm like, how am I supposed to talk to people? But I go through the training, I, make it through. And then afterwards, I'm like, I want to become good at this. And so I started following some legendary FBI agents that are really good. They got a high rate of, high percentage of confessions, right? Confession is that is the golden, ticket for getting people to plead guilty and not have to go to trial, right? If I can get a guy to say, yeah, I robbed the bank, and I put a piece of paper in front of him and say, can you write down exactly what you did? That's a real tough one for him to fight once you get into court, which is a whole behemoth in itself, right? So I started working on some of these techniques. They were working for me. I started seeing some wins, and I got real comfortable in interrogation on the criminal side. When I got to the jihadist terrorism side, it didn't work at all. That's where I was like running into walls. People would just stand up and walk out of the room on me. And I said, hey, what happened? Why aren't you talking to me? So what I did is I started leveraging rapport. That's what I did. I said, I've got to get these people comfortable with me. I'm a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. But I still need to get them to just sit in the room with me for a few hours and talk, right? So I would essentially build rapport with them. I would build rapport, and then my whole goal was to get them to talk for 1 hour. I almost had it down to a science, Louis, at some point. I had almost set my watch to it. I said, okay, I've got rapport with this guy, and I'm just going to encourage him to talk. Hey, tell me more about this. Help me understand personal training. How does that work? Go into detail. How long have you been doing this? And just encourage their train of thought, get them talking for about an hour. And then my technique was I would thread in about 10 controversial elicitations or questions. So I would say, I don't know, in the personal training realm, there's probably some techniques that are not working, but people are selling it and making millions off. And I'd say, hey, what do you think about this technique? And it would give them a chance. I'd say, what do you think about the situation in Palestine? What do you think about Americans in Iraq? I give them things where they're going to go right or left on that. And it would help me understand their mindset and how radical they were. And that helped me kind of determine that grass read on the line. This is where this guy is on the radicalization process. This is his trajectory. So that's what I taught, and that's what worked for me. What's being used now, I do think it's all human nature. I don't know how we get away from that in interrogation, because you've got to have that touch point with a person. They've got to get comfortable with you. I just don't know how we get some whiz bang thing that helps us, with the quick, get rich quick scheme in interrogation. I think you got to spend time in the room. You got to get to know them. They got to like you. They got to respect you on both the human intelligence side and interrogation. So I just don't know how we get away from that. And I still go back to the 1950s at work back then. I think it still works today. So
Fair enough. Where do you see it going then? So if we look at the future a little bit too, and I think this would be a nice place to maybe tie in a little bit about what you're doing as well then. So where do you see it all heading? What kind of changes or innovations do you see sort of, having an effect in this industry? What things do you feel like are going to be pretty staple in time in terms of things that just won't be changing anytime soon, and what will?
yeah, so the future of this, and I wrote a book called The Dark Trajectory of Jihad. At one point when I was speaking at conferences, I had like police officers saying, "Hey, do you have this written down anywhere?" And so I eventually I wrote a short book that kind of goes into a lot of the details of this. But at the end, I talk about the future of this, like what I see. This is my own opinion of where all this is going, and I think that a lot of things won't change. If you look at the Osama bin Laden, they believe in the what's called the Salafi jihadist manhaj, which essentially means we need to live like the first three generations of Islam. So they are really kind of, if you're really radical, you're stuck back during the beginning of Islam. So that they're not looking to modernize. They don't like modernization. They don't like innovations, which is in Arabic called bid'ah. They don't like innovations. They don't like pressing into that kind of thing. Are they going to leverage technology? Yes. Are they going to leverage AI? Absolutely. But we have to, recognize that their goal is to live in austere conditions. Talk to someone and they, as far as the radicalization process, they go from sleeping in their bed at night to sleeping on the floor of their bedroom because they feel like that's more austere, to sleeping in a cot in their garage, to sleeping on cement in their garage. This is what they believe is progress, right? So for us, we see that as kind of going backwards, but for the real radical folks, and let me just say this, Louis, my opinion is the majority of Muslims will never become radicalized or jihadists. Like there's a small percentage, right? And people try to guess what that number is. I don't get involved in that. But there's a small percentage of folks that will become radicalized. And that's where I'm focused. The majority of Muslims will never walk down this road. We can't indict the Muslim, community globally, for the small percentage of ISIS folks and Al-Qaeda folks, right? But we do need to understand the ones that are going bad, right? But I think where we can get better is, and I'll talk a little bit about interrogation, is I need to speak their language as far as, if they have younger folks involved and they are leveraging technology and they are leveraging AI, like I want to be able to speak that language with them. I did my master's degree on the language of radicalization. I built it into this 100-page paper that, probably no one will read, that got, reduced to an article, but I talked about the words and the themes that are used by the Osama bin Laden guys, right? Or the radical guy that's in Yemen that's leading people to their death, right? Because we need to be able to speak that to have a commonality to recruit them, right? And so I think where it's going is I do think technology and AI is going to be part of this, whole spin. And so I think being able to kind of speak that language with them and understand what they're talking about, I think it's going to help a lot. But I think the benefit to us is their leadership is still going to keep them caught in the past. And we know that past, and that's not going to change.
Got it. Okay, so we're kind of running up to the end of this podcast now, but one thing I really want to do is just get a few bits of really actionable advice and intel for the people listening in today too. That's something I always try to make a point of in this podcast, is just everyone listening in, whether any walk of life, just making sure they have something that really, they can think about and maybe take away from this and go and apply. So off the back of that conversation, here's some of the things that I'm thinking to hit on there. So you mentioned obviously the interrogation methods and things there too. I personally, as you know, as crazy as they sound, I actually see a big correlation there between that and potentially business deals and communications in business as well. So something that I can immediately put as one of my pointers there too is, for example, like you just said about speaking their language and putting yourselves in their shoes and being able to appeal to them, you know, creating great opportunities and, you know, getting the best out of people. You have to be able to speak their language, understand their needs and see how you can fulfill them. That's like business 101. And that's, you know, what's got me a lot of opportunities, and you have to do your homework on that too. So from the kind of the word of interrogation and stuff too, and all the work that you've done, you've seen in just human intelligence and kind of figuring that out and stuff too, and appealing to people and getting the most out of them. Any really good key points of things that are a little bit less known on the streets that you could give us to think about when we're next doing a business deal or trying to strike something or, you know, negotiate, for example? And then the other side of that too, anything that everyone should be doing. So with a world that's changing and a dangerous world at that, for sure, anything that everyone on the street should be looking at. I know you do jiu-jitsu, like you'd mentioned. So is that something that you feel like should be done out of personal development, or is it a necessity going into the future to protect yourself?
Yeah, so I think that you mentioned the word homework, right? I'm a big fan of knowing as much as I can before I walk into a room, or I'm going to interview a guy with bad intentions, or I'm going to talk to a C-suite, right, on the business side. So I think you hit it. I think you kind of answered the question of doing deep research and homework on the situation you're walking into, right? Now, I'm going to caveat that with everything changes. Like you walk into the room and you were planning on talking to this guy and he's not available and someone else steps in, right? I don't even know who this guy is. But I think doing as much as you can as far as, doing your homework and even rehearsing, before you walk in. Like way back in the 1980s, I went to Army Ranger School. We did a lot of planning and then we did a ton of rehearsals. Like we're going to go out on patrol, we're going to cross a stream, we're going to do an air mobile operation or an airborne operation, and we would rehearse. Like I think those things on the business side are critical. So doing as much homework as possible. I call it due diligence. I want to know what I'm walking into, and I do it for other people. So companies will come to me and say, we're looking to strike a deal or collaborate with this corporation in Dubai, but we want to get as much information about them as possible. Well, we do deep open source intelligence work, and we do some human intelligence work there too. If we have people in Dubai that can do research on the ground or know people there, so we kind of double tap that. But I also say, like when I was on FBI SWAT, we had this amazing plan, and we all said as soon as we walk out of the door after the briefing, everything changes. So we've got to be flexible. So I think doing research, have a really great plan, but be flexible as soon as you walk out the door. And then on the backside, your other question, I think, what can we be doing? I teach an advanced kidnapping course, Louis. It's super fun for me. It's super unfun for other people. But it basically trains people to go overseas to, dangerous, environments and not get kidnapped. And a lot of it's about situational awareness. So the whole brunt of the course is about situational awareness. We teach defeating restraints, how to get out of handcuffs, wire, rope, things like that. If you do get handcuffed, we teach you about the psychology of captivity. What's it like to be captive for days or weeks or months or whatever? But we really try to help you avoid not getting kidnapped or get mugged or attacked or whatever it might be through situational awareness. So for me, I always tell people as much as you can become more situationally aware, the better. I always teach up front, kind of green, yellow, red. Green is, when I go walk around downtown London, I have no fears. Nothing bad will ever happen to me. I'm not going to get pickpocketed, And then red is, oh my gosh, I'm going to get robbed. I'm going to get, kidnapped in downtown London. Well, yellow's where we really want you, which is kind of a relaxed awareness. Like just have your head on a swivel, right? Stay aware of your surroundings. Keep kind of a bubble around you so no one can grab something out of your purse or whatever. So So I think on the other side of what can people do, I'm a big fan of situational awareness. Even if you're walking out of the movie theater to your car at night by yourself, have your keys ready, do a 360 around your car to make sure no one's, snuck into your car, and get in and take off and get out of there. So those are a couple thoughts.
That's great. Absolutely perfect, Brig. Thank you so much. So that is that's the load of questions I got for you today. I tell you what, this has been a really great podcast. I've thoroughly enjoyed that and learned a whole lot. But let's learn a bit more about where we can find more of your stuff then. So I know you mentioned you got a book. Where can we find that? If you want to lay a bit of groundwork for some of the businesses you have going on too, that would be great as well. And just have that couple of minutes to promote away. Don't forget to drop the links as well where we can find them, and I'll obviously include them in the description too, whatever you put out there now. So fire away.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me again, Louis. It's been interesting, a lot of fun. I always kind of recommend people connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where I put a lot of information out on terrorism and espionage and counterintelligence. So please reach out and connect to me on LinkedIn. We have a company called Kronus Intelligence Group. It's KRONUS intelligencegroup.com. So we're doing a lot of cool things at the intersection of AI technology and intelligence and all of that. And then the book is, again, Dark Trajectory of Jihad. It's on Amazon. It's on the major dealers, but it's on Amazon, and I've got it now in audio format. So it's a quick read, it's a quick listen, and I always love to get reviews, from people, because I'm always looking to tweak everything I'm doing. So, but yeah, reach out on LinkedIn is usually the best.
Awesome. I'm going to grab one. Brig, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. Honestly, just a really great chat. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Everything you do and have done has been in service of a much bigger cause than yourself. And I think we'd be in a very scary or scarier world without people like you out there in the field. So I appreciate you, everything you've done. And just want to say a massive thank you for today as well. It's been really great.
Yeah, thanks for the time, and thanks for the very interesting questions.
Absolutely. Well, it is my job, sir. Thank you guys for listening. This was episode 161. If you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen to the future ones as well, make sure to hit the subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment in that next one. Cheers.